Morning, James.
Good morning.
How are you?
Pretty good. I think we both have a little bit of a cough today. So if we suddenly kind of cut out, it's probably because we're coughing and spluttering over to the side. Other than that,
absolutely.
I can't complain.
We've chosen a good day to do a podcast when we've both got a bit of a cough, right? The only thing that matters is the audio, and we'll be coughing all the way through it. But
apologies, everyone.
It won't be a problem. I'm sure the people won't mind. But thank you for coming on. It's a pleasure to have you on. For those who are new to listening to this podcast or watching on YouTube, bit of an overview of Leadership Unplugged is that the general idea is that it's a sort of unfiltered, raw, as much as we can be, unedited look. It depends whether your dogs today, James, decide to misbehave, whether we have to edit some stuff out.
Yeah, I can hear them in the background. I don't know if the mic's picking them up, but you might see them walking in and out and just checking in on what we're doing.
There we go. That's a reason for us to go viral right there, isn't it? So, but generally unscripted, we might have a general idea of the things that we want to talk about with people like yourself who are leaders in their field with a load of experience, but looking at things probably through a different lens and a different viewpoint. We've had operational people on here, technical people on here, all sorts. So you and I have known each other for a little while and had some really interesting discussions. So I'm excited to see where this goes today. But for all the viewers and listeners, let's start with yourself, James. Give us a bit of a background on you and what you do now and how you got to where you got to.
Sure. So way back in the day, physics was my thing. I was a sort of scientist by training and fascinated by nature and trying to understand how everything works, and mathematics and things like that. All these intellectual curiosities kept me quite engaged. Mm-hmm. And that curiosity led me to learning programming languages. I taught myself a bunch of programming languages, got into electronics and all sorts of bits and pieces like tinkering. In my 20s, I kind of flipped things on their head and turned the career of physics into the hobby, and the hobby of computers and technology and innovation into career. And I did so by getting into startups. I jumped into startups and started slinging code, started trying to work out how to innovate. And I think by virtue of my sort of work ethic and my curiosity, and I think because I wanted to make things better ultimately, and maybe we can talk a little bit about sort of how you end up in that leadership track later. I became a CTO. I became a CTO of a startup and loved it. I loved being able to have a positive impact on the people around me. Loved being able to build the future, as I always used to like to call it. Slightly kind of, I don't know if I'll do my best not to swear, but a bit sort of tongue in cheek, a little bit sort of cringy maybe. And did lots more of that in my 20s. Just kept sort of learning how to innovate, how to build companies. Founded a business with a couple of very smart guys who went on to do great things. And then decided I should probably test waters, test myself, and go and see whether or not larger corporates have some secret sauce. How are they doing what they're doing? So got involved with BAE and their applied intelligence, which was a massive learning experience for me. That was all about sort of being a startup maverick and trying to better understand the process of innovation and help them innovate. So lots of reading various papers and things on how organizations do this sort of stuff, understanding innovation cycles, again, feeding that curious mind. I was there for a little while before realizing that I wanted to go back to startups. I'm happy to talk about why we sort of made that choice. And I've been basically in startups ever since. There was a period where I did some consulting with BCG, which is trying to help sort of larger organizations do digital transformation. Again, trying to sort of sell that sort of startup, sort of secret sauce. I don't know if I've used that phrase too many times now to larger companies, and having varying degrees of success. Now I'm spending my time working as a sort of fractional CTO and executive coach. So trying to work with lots of startups, trying to solve lots of problems with interesting people who are forward thinking, looking to build the future. And I suppose applying a lot of the people side of solving problems, because I've been on a bit of a journey. I've recognized that I think people are actually one of the most important parts of this process. Without them, there's not much point in doing any of it. So maybe we'll get onto some of what makes people interesting, what makes them tick, and how to get the most out of them in these sorts of teams.
Really interesting. It's a good run. That's a good run through. There's about a million things that I could break down from that. I'm gonna rewind just and work with me here, right? So
Sure.
at the start, you mentioned about tinkering and electronics, but then ultimately went down what sounds like more of a software route and writing code.
Yeah.
What was there a reason for that?
Yes.
To cast your mind back a little bit.
Yeah, no. Well, at a young age, I remember I used to really enjoy things like woodwork. I don't know if anybody else had one of these, but I got this sort of toolkit. It was like a little wooden box, split down the middle, and you'd open it up. It was sort of fan outwards, and inside you had a chisel and you had a saw.
Oh yeah.
You had a couple of screwdrivers. It was like a children's toolkit, but I mean that saw was sharp. You could cut a finger off. It was proper sort of metal tools in there. But compared to what my father had his sort of garage full of all these tools and all these, my little sort of wooden box, and then I would get that out and I would saw bits of wood and I would drill little bits of holes and sand things down and stuff. And there was something very I suppose engaging. It's quite a visceral experience, creating something, shaping reality. I got a lot out of that, but I also learned that you have to be careful. You have to plan your cuts because there is no undo feature outside of computers. So one of the things I think that compelled me about machines is I could learn and I could experiment so much more quickly in these virtual worlds. I could create something as quickly as my fingers could sort of translate my ideas into the machine, and I would get results back. So for me, the software route was compelling because I suppose fundamentally it allowed me to get those dopamine hits more quickly. Right? I could learn, I could solve problems, I could release that pleasurable experience in my brain much more quickly. So I was essentially just chasing the high.
That makes a lot of sense. And that transition then, if we follow the timeline of your summary of moving from cutting code to leadership, if you like, and sort of more seniority as a CTO, do you think that's a natural progression for most people, or was that very specific to you, and why did it happen?
Oh, it's definitely not something for everyone. I've worked with a number of people who don't want to go down that management track. It doesn't appeal to them. There are individual contributors who want to focus on solving those problems and contributing individually. There are people who are interested and curious in other areas and want to maybe get involved in the organizational and the leadership and the management side of things. I alluded to this earlier. I don't know that I got into being a CTO because I was wanting to lead necessarily. I more wanted to fix things. I saw that there was a gap. There was a need that needed to be satisfied in some way, and I wanted things to be better. And for me, the way to make things better was to, I was going to say build the future again, but that will become like my bloody slogan. I'll be walking down. I don't want to walk down the street and someone just goes, "Oh, I build the future." So I'll think of something else to say. I wanted to, positively affect change around me, and taking on some of that responsibility gave me the ability to do that. So I could start to have a say at the decision-making table. I could start to say, I think, this might be a good way of learning more quickly or building a bit of software. I've heard from people on the team that we have pain points in certain areas, and I'd like to do something about that. So I think it probably came about for me through me being sort of quite a compassionate person. I've always been somebody to sort of, I guess, worry about other people and want things to be better. And by taking on that leadership position, by taking on that responsibility, I was able to affect positive change in the team and the world around me.
Let's explore your catchphrase. It's definitely going to become a catchphrase.
Oh no!
If it sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, the young James was probably very inquisitive, very curious. And wanted to
probably too much so. Yeah.
No, never. I don't think you could be too, because you've ended up doing great things and having a positive impact on the world in a number of different ways, which is amazing.
Well,
so
you haven't seen my reports from school. I was an insufferable child. I apologize profusely to all of my teachers. I was, a very inquisitive little GIT.
Let's hope they're listening and they take that apology. And then, but it sounds like that maybe there was a shift in the dial, and it moved away from I want to create things and I want to make things and I'm inquisitive by nature to, well, actually now what I create and what I'm inquisitive about and what I can make can actually impact in a positive way. So was that a conscious moment?
I don't know that I had sort of an epiphany and changed course suddenly. I spent a lot of time thinking about innovation. I've spent a lot of time thinking about how to have a positive impact and to do better. And that's taken me to areas like the philosophy of happiness, looking at sort of ancient Greek philosophers and some of their ideas. So history, looking at the past and trying to learn from other people's experience in these areas, through to everything like more recent sort of positive psychology and behavioral economics. And on that journey, I've come to realize that there are a number of ways we can positively affect the world around us, but all of those involve other people. I don't know that there's anything really that you can do that's entirely solitary and has a positive impact on the world. Possibly just investing in yourself and trying to be a kinder person, meditation and mindfulness. But you're probably going to need to talk to somebody else to learn about that stuff. And you should probably be sharing that knowledge once you acquire it. So I'm somebody that really believes in connecting with others and sharing and growing together, and that being a big part of innovation. A lot of the companies, a lot of the teams I've been a part of, you realize as we expand our knowledge that specialization is required. You can't be the leading specialist in every field anymore. There are ways you can understand and generalize through mathematics and science. You can come up with a theory that will allow you to make fantastic predictions about the way the universe works, but that doesn't incorporate human behavior. It doesn't incorporate so much of our everyday experience. So you need to team up with other people who have deep understanding of human-computer interaction patterns, user experience, software. Even in the software engineering field, you can go into so many different areas of specialization. You always hear front end and back end. Well, within front end, you've got multiple frameworks and multiple devices that you're deploying to. There's so much to learn and so little time that you need to collaborate. You need to work well with other people. So I think, as I say, there wasn't like an epiphany where suddenly I woke up one morning and I was like, hey, I can't do this on my own. I'd be much better off working with other people and collaborating. It was more a series of steps around things like realizing, when I moved into a CTO role, that me writing code every day might not be the best thing for the team. I might actually slow people down by directly contributing, and I need to think about how other people can take responsibility for some of these things. Those sorts of moments in my career have, I think, led me to the place that I'm at now, where I very much realized that, I am, young me would hate me saying this, but a cog in a machine, in a larger sort of system. And there's things I can do to grease myself and contribute. But if I can help 4 or 5 people around me, the effects of that are much more significant than just working on myself.
And I'm assuming part of your joy and part of your happiness comes from having that positive impact. It sounds you feel that you can potentially positively impact things to a greater extent, i.e. you're a bigger cog in a smaller machine in the startup scale-up world, as opposed to some of the big corporates that you alluded to earlier. Would that be a fair assumption?
Yeah. So I remember doing leadership training a little while ago, and part of that was around better understanding yourself. If you want to be a good leader, you need to know who you are. And part of learning who you are is identifying your strengths and identifying your values. This comes from sort of positive psychology, Gallup and their Clifton strengths, some of those sort of ideas. The exercise you do with wanting to identify your values is to think back on your career, think back on your life, and remember the moments when you felt really proud, when you felt like you'd accomplished something, when you'd done something great. And when I thought back on those moments, it was having done things for other people. It was our startup failing. And the last time I got together with the product team and we were sat around a table in a pub, and we were having a couple of drinks, and everyone was a little bit sort of somber because, we hadn't succeeded. But everybody was talking about what they were doing next, and they had great opportunities and great, jobs and whatever else lined up that they're really excited about. So it, in some way, been a good stepping stone where they developed themselves and were in a good position to do more and go where they wanted with their lives. And one of the guys came to me as we were sort of saying our goodbyes and said, I wanted to thank you because this company's been one of the best companies I've ever worked at. And when I think about it now, I still kind of well up. It really means something to me. I felt like I made things better for someone else. And, some of the ideas behind sort of the philosophy of happiness, eudaimonia and arete from sort of the ancient Greeks, a lot of these things come from virtues. They come from feeling like you're connected to something bigger than yourself. So the value for me of sort of influence, being able to positively influence the world around me, is very important. And in larger organizations, I've struggled to do that. It's very hard to influence and to shift the machine. It's a behemoth, right? And it has these emergent properties that are hard to predict. So in smaller interactions, in coaching sessions, in startups, we can move a lot more quickly. We can come together and affect change. In large organizations where potentially somebody you've never met, maybe the only exchange you ever had with them is through the email in that Outlook inbox. That person can completely scupper a project, a plan. For me, that's not a very good way of human beings interacting. So I subscribe to this idea that we are, I think it was Hitchens who said, we are poorly evolved primates and we are inherently limited. I think it's about 150 people. Beyond 150 people, we struggle to relate. We can't remember everyone anymore. So I think there are fundamental limits in our biology that mean in organizations where you've got thousands, tens of thousands of people who are, pixels on a screen, we are setting ourselves up to fail. So it was a few of these things that sort of made me think I want to be a cog in a smaller machine rather than a cog in a much larger one.
Do you think if we were to try and dissect happiness and what happiness means to individuals, in your reality there, where the feedback loop was important to you experiencing the happiness and you describing that story can only exist if that person ever came back to you and said, oh, by the way, you've had a really positive impact on me and I love what we did with this company. Do you think there's an element of we're always impacting the world around us and we're always impacting people positively and negatively all around us? Do you think that you can practice happiness and be conscious of happiness and that impact without the feedback loop there? Like that guy had never said that, but a part of you knows that existed anyway.
Yeah, that's my. So there are commonalities, I think, with happiness that exist in all human beings. When Freud was asked about happiness, he said it comes down to love and purpose. We need to have a sort of sense of connection to others. We need to have relationships and we need to feel like we're doing something impactful. Our contribution, our existence is significant in some way. If you look at the ancient Greeks and their ideas around eudaimonia and happiness, they talked about essentially being a good person, about being virtuous, about being kind, about being generous, about donating to the arts, being creative and connecting with something larger than yourself. I think these are common to everyone. These ideas, these things work for every single human being. And then on the more recent developments around understanding sort of brain chemistry, the acronym DOSE, dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and endorphins. All human beings have some amount of those going through their system and they will have well understood effects on you. So, if you go out and exercise, you're going to get endorphins flowing through your system and that will make you feel good. So in terms of being happy, in terms of being healthy, there are definitely commonalities. But no, to your point, I think you're right. The validation that I received from somebody else telling me that I did something positive is personal to me and tied to sort of my identity, my ego, my value system. So I suppose if you wanted to use a metaphor, you could say, we all have the same sort of paints available to us, but different people are painted on that canvas in different ways, right? There will be different combinations of the colors and different things will matter to different individuals. And that speaks to your earlier question about is, sort of leadership for everyone? Is that the track for everyone? I think to some degree, yes, but people will get happiness and value and reward from other areas in their life too.
The reason I asked the question, there's a book, and I'm struggling to remember the name of the author, but it was called The 5 People You Meet in Heaven. It's a fictional book that I read when I was much younger.
Was it really?
yeah. And
sorry.
That was good. I like that. And
I couldn't resist. I'm so sorry.
it was about 5 people that you will have impacted through your life that you wouldn't have known about. In your example, it wouldn't have been that guy. It would have been somebody else that you might have passed in the street and said something to, and the positive ripple effect of that happening. And I always remember thinking, like, what a wonderful state to be in if you could always consciously understand that you are positively impacting people, regardless of whether people give you the feedback loop on it or not. If you could practice that, then I think that would have a massive ripple effect. So slight side tangent, but I'm guessing then from your experience of happiness and wanting to have positive impact and consciously, it sounds like the moment of thinking these things happened naturally, but then you've made a concerted effort to understand them better. Mm-hmm. Is that because you're trying to get other people to understand that, because you think from a leadership perspective, like if we're thinking of a business, that it's important that those people feel happy and understood and listened to, etc., so that they can be the best versions of themselves and experience their own happiness?
I think that's definitely part of it. I don't know that I've changed that much since I was a child. I'm still the inquisitive little runt who wants to know how everything works and asks the question why over and over again and pokes and prods things to see what will happen. I think with age, I've just become a little more respectful of others. So I'm not poking and prodding them quite as much. But I've always wanted to know what makes people tick. Why do they behave the way they do? What makes the world work the way that it does? And the understanding of that, I think, is partly been me trying to improve myself. I want to be a better person. And to understand how you can be better, I think you have to understand how other people work and what other people care about. If you want to sort of optimize relationships, you need to think a little bit about what goes into that. So, yeah, I think it's a combination of things, probably. I just wanted to add as well to your point about sort of where does happiness come from. All of our feelings come from within. To my knowledge, nobody has a sort of emotion ray gun that they can point at us and make us feel happy or sad or whatever else. So mindfulness and some of these ideas, stoicism will talk about exercising the mind like you would the body. And in doing so, being able to temper and control some of your emotions. So you can find happiness and positivity where otherwise you wouldn't. And I actually think that's really important because, as you're saying, you think about the positive impact you have on the people around you. You can have a negative impact as well, even without doing it consciously. And if you put yourself on the other side of that equation and realize, well, you might be on the receiving end of negativity from other people, it's very important to work on yourself so that you can deal with those sorts of stimuli and not end up dwelling on it and beating yourself up and having a bad time. So, yeah, I think a lot of it's come about through me wanting to better understand the world around me, have a better relationship with it, have a better relationship with the people in it. And I do. So this, I mean, whether we get into this topic or not, I mean, some of the things that you learn when you start looking into stuff, you realize that people can be quite predictable. People will react in certain ways, and with that knowledge, there comes a certain amount of responsibility. I feel quite bad about some of the work that I've done with startups in the past, where I've used psychology and gamification to try to drive engagement metrics to keep people using an app for longer. I still kind of feel a bit shitty about myself for doing that because I think it was a little bit irresponsible, unethical. I don't think it's quite on the same sort of scale as Oppenheimer's realization that he was sort of potentially destroying the world. But if you look at the sort of long-term effects of sort of social media and engagement and things and how we're leveraging technology, when you learn about these things, you can do good with them. You can also do some harm with them. So there's an interesting sort of balance there. The dark triad sort of comes to mind. I don't know if you're familiar with this idea that leaders are disproportionately exhibiting signs of Machiavellianism, narcissism, and psychopathy. 1 in 5 CEOs are psychopaths.
Really?
And these personality
by definition,
traits,
I imagine.
Yes, yeah, they don't have compassion. They don't feel anything for other people. They don't care if you're suffering or struggling. There's something to be thought about there with the sort of dark triad and how that plays into leadership. And when you learn some of these things, if you're not a psychopath, then you probably will do good with this stuff. You might realize that I can have a conversation with someone and lead them in a certain direction, which would be a Machiavellian thing to do. But I'm doing it for the right reasons. I think a good example of that in a book I've been reading recently is around if you were, if you were in charge of the lunches for children in school and you got together with somebody who understood behavioral economics, you might start thinking about rearranging the food that's presented to those children to influence their decision making, to make them pick maybe healthy things, or maybe you can make them pick the things they would have picked if they hadn't been manipulated, or maybe you pick the things that a supplier is going to give you a little backhander for putting on the shelves. Once you start realizing that human beings are predictable and can be influenced, there's a certain amount of sort of ethical thinking I think that needs to come into these things. And this comes up whenever we're talking about technology, right? Whenever we're talking about leadership, doing right with the things that you learn. Going on a slight tangent. I don't know if you want to start talking about dark triads and things.
I think it's interesting. I guess. Do you apply this level of depth when it comes to your thinking? Then, so if you were working with 10 startups right now, would you go into this level of depth of trying to get the leaders that you might be coaching or the company that you're trying to grow and get to be successful? Do they need to understand that, or are you just operating on the surface level in order to get people to behave a certain way, or do you deem that as unethical as you described in some instances?
It depends. That's my other slogan. It depends. So with coaching, quite often the person that I'm working with is steering the direction. They decide the goals. Right. They have an idea of where they want to get to, and I'm just there to be a sort of trusted partner and to help explore the space and work out where we want to go. I might share some of this knowledge, some of this information if I think it will help, but a lot of that is about exploring that person rather than exploring me. With startups and innovation, I'm quite often asked to solve the problem. I'm not given a sort of person to help. We're not exploring that person and trying to get them somewhere. We might be trying to do something that's never been done before. And in those situations, I will call on my knowledge and my experience to try and help and solve that problem. That's where I think some of these ethical questions come up. When I was asked to gamify an experience and to put together a sort of product roadmap, some recommendations, some strategy around that, I did it. I went off and I looked at that. But I communicated some of the risks. I talked about how we would mitigate some of that stuff. And I brought actually some of my experience having done some work with a gambling company a while ago. In the gambling industry, they're obviously regulated, so they have requirements around things like having a timer on screen at all times, so you can see how long you've been in the gambling interface, regular prompts to say, hey, you've been here a certain amount of time. Do you want to take a break? Obviously, you can just say no and carry on, but there's some thinking around sort of trying to quantify and make sure that people realize what they're doing.
Yeah.
And I did suggest that we could do some of these things. We need to make sure that if we're going to do this, we should probably have some sort of support system. If you're going, well, we were dealing with currency, right? So you could put money into the system and then you could give money to content creators, things like that. And my advice was that we should have checks and balances in there. We should make sure that people aren't putting more than a certain amount in per unit time. So ultimately, it's not up to me. I don't control what they do with that information. They can say, thanks to the advice, James, we're not going to extend your engagements, and then go and build whatever they want with that information. But I feel I can sleep, soundly at night, more or less, knowing that I sort of communicated some of the risks, some of the impacts, and gave some advice that would balance things out hopefully enough.
Do you find that there's, with these startups that you work with that are in the sort of tech space, do you find that there are common challenges and common problems? And if so, what are they?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I don't know how much of it's selection bias, but no, I mean, a big part of the reason why I started spending more time on the people side of things was that I recognized that people are the problem. And I mean, I'm trying, hopefully that's taken in the right sort of way. But when you look at the process of innovation at the very early stage, there's some sort of creativity, and creativity is something that's very hard to standardize. If you go to somebody and say, I want you to come up with a with calculus, a theory of sort of, light. They can't just sit down and sort of start writing it all out, right? They've got to think, they've got to research. It takes potentially an arbitrary amount of time. In those creative endeavors, it's very hard to have deadlines and to impose constraints. So there's a specific process you need over there, and you need to understand the people and how they work to get the most out of them. You can then go through this sort of innovation process where you start getting into commercializing things, right? You're running experiments. And if you're running an experiment, you might know how long that's going to take. I know how long it's going to take to maybe put a prototype together or send out an email or whatever else it might be. And I know it might take a week or a couple of weeks to get some data back to be able to learn from this in a quantitative way. The commercialization process we won't get into. All of that requires people, the right people working and thinking in the right way. It's not so much a technology problem. It's, choosing which solution to send email is pretty straightforward in comparison to making sure you've got the right people thinking in the right way, and that they're able to do their jobs effectively, that they have access to the information that they need, that they're happy and they're healthy. All of these things you've got to think about to be able to play these games. I liken it to a sort of, Maslow's hierarchy of needs is applied to the individual. We need food, and we need water, and we need shelter, and then we can eventually work our way up to the higher levels of sort of self-actualization and the sort of spiritual and interesting and intellectual pursuits. I think a similar sort of hierarchy of needs exists for organizations, where you need those foundational pieces in place before you can get to these sort of self-actualization, innovation, and experimentation, and everything else. And the foundational pieces, a lot of those come down to your people. If people aren't getting paid, if a payroll's not going through, that causes an immense amount of stress and people can't concentrate. So getting the environment right, getting the culture right is foundational. If you don't have that stuff, then you're not going to be able to experiment. You're not going to be able to bring brilliant people together and I was going to say build the future again, but I won't.
I've got a tally of the amount of times you're gonna say.
Yeah, there needs to be a count on the screen.
Yeah.
Or can we just beep it out? Can we just censor it? Like it's like I'm swearing. I prefer that.
So do you think, in your opinion, as we move forward through time and technology advances in crazy and wonderful ways, that this problem will change? Like, will it become more of a tech problem, or will these fundamental human decision-making ideas be the thing that is always the challenge?
And once you start pushing boundaries, then you'll encounter problems in all of those areas. If you're talking about particle accelerators, if you want to test energy levels that are beyond that of the LHC, then you're getting into technology problems. You're going to have to build a particle collider that is on the scale of a solar system. There's obviously a lot of people problems to take into account there, but there are insurmountable engineering challenges that we have to work out, and there'll be material science and research that we have to do to make that kind of stuff happen. If you push the boundaries of time, at some point our species won't exist anymore, or at least it will be unrecognizable. While there are still kind of human beings in play, assuming that some artificial general intelligence hasn't come along and maybe slammed us into a great filter, there will maybe be technological developments. Maybe in the future we'll have these the direct ability to read each other's minds, to cast emotions into one another and connect in ways that we can't imagine. That there is research going into this at the moment where we're doing real-time brain imaging. Through machine learning, we're able to start extrapolating how people feel. If you extend that into the future, you could imagine a world where, we're kind of getting into the science sort of fiction realms, but fringe type stuff. If you do push the boundaries, then yes, there will be massive changes to humanity. In the short term, I'm reminded of Hitchens' poorly evolved primates. I think it's hard to say. We're a simple species. I think slightly arrogant. We have a slightly inflated sort of ego, and are blissfully unaware of our biases and our limitations. I don't know that those will ever go away without some form of technological augmentation, because they're part of our brain chemistry. They're just part of the way we exist, and evolution is not going to change that anytime soon. So the only way we could influence that would be through technology. And I'm not aware of a company working on something that will stop us from being relativistic. it's this fantastic idea that the way we price things is anchored on our initial experience. If you are told that, I think the case study that's used is black pearls. A guy wanted to start selling black pearls, and they were essentially worthless. Nobody wanted them. So he got a jeweler in a very upmarket part of New York to put these black pearls in the window and stick a ludicrous price on them. Nobody bought them, but it didn't matter because everybody saw the price and then realized, or at least assumed, that black pearls were very, very valuable. So then when they did start selling them, all of a sudden the price point was very, very high and people attributed value. We're a funny bunch, right? We like to think that we're very smart and we're very bright, but then we're so simple and so impressionable. So do I think people problems will go away? I think people problems will exist as long as people do. In the future, maybe we won't be people anymore, but we're getting so far into sort of science fiction at that point. Thousands of years, tens of thousands of years. If I get it right, my goodness, I'll be flabbergasted.
How will we know? Or maybe we will. Maybe we'll have ways of knowing. So let's bring this back into the realms of reality then. So if we're looking at the next 12 months, there's been lots of changes within technology, generative AI. We've had a very strange economy across the globe, and things moving in directions that people might not fully understand. From your perspective, if you were to be given advice to other leaders out there, people who are running their own tech startups or scale ups, what would be your advice?
Specifically with regards to AI or more generally?
So I think, more generally. So I understand that a lot of what you do is go in and understand what a business's problems are and then reflect a solution from that point. But if there, maybe there isn't one, but if there was a capture all type solution to what leaders need to be thinking of as they move forward over the next 12 months, if you were a tech startup or scale up, what do you need to be thinking of and be aware of?
So typically my advice will be tailored to the company. And I'll need to do a bit of discovery to understand where their strengths are and what their aspirations are to be able to give them some bespoke advice. More generally, if I don't know anything about the company, I would say there are some fundamental, if we think about that sort of hierarchy of needs for an organization, having the right team of people empowered and enabled to be able to affect change is really what makes the difference between companies that succeed and companies that fail. And that's not unique to small or large companies. There are case studies of much larger businesses able to do this as well. They do it through structured ideation processes where anybody in the organization can make suggestions about improvements and innovations that they think will be successful. And then a process of advocation and selection for the incoming ideas. The key thing there is it's very much about leveraging the expertise and the experience and the knowledge that you have in your organization. Everybody potentially will have something valuable to contribute, and then layering strategy on top of that to make sure you're heading in the right sort of direction. If you're doing those things within an organization, then you're much more likely to succeed. I think we have to get, if we get into specifics, if you're, heavily regulated, then there'll be different challenges to face to, say, somebody who, is maybe doing some AI stuff right now where there's very little regulation. You can kind of be a bit more footloose and fancy free. But I think fundamentally that's what it's about. And that's probably shaped by my background in science, right? My background in physics is that, we were always taught that it's about sort of science. It's the best thing that we have for learning about the world around us. You do some research, you do some thinking, you come up with an experiment, you go out and you poke and prod things, you measure what happens, and then you update your thinking based on those results. And that same, output of thousands of years of very smart people thinking very hard about how to navigate this universe in which we find ourselves is, I'm just applying that to business, to startups, to companies, and saying, well, how do we use something like a scientific method where we experiment and we learn, because we're not very good at predicting the future. If you can get a good process within a team where you're able to test your hypotheses, test your ideas, and then take that learning and do better, form that sort of heart of agile loop, collaborate, deliver, reflect, improve, then you're in a good position to compete and to win. the specifics obviously are important, right? That's not much use to a company, right? You might need to, I don't know, you might find that your team aren't able, if we're talking about software, you might find your team aren't shipping as quickly as you'd like. And that might be because maybe the work isn't specified well enough. It might be because the requirements are constantly changing. So once you get into the weeds and you start looking at kind of where some of these issues come from, once you start understanding definitions of success, I mentioned sort of cycle time, getting something out there, being able to learn, having the right measurements, and then working on improving those things. You apply the same process there, right? So one of my other little sort of mantras is treating your process like you do your product. When you're building a product, a lot of people in product development know you run experiments, you do user research, you put things in front of customers, and you get results back through qualitative and quantitative testing, and then you incorporate that learning in the next iteration. You should be applying that same process to your internal ways of working. You have your customers are your team, and you're coming up with a product which is the way you work, your process, your tools, and your technologies. Make sure you have the best product you can by running things like regular retrospectives. So it all fundamentally boils down to this sort of iterative loop, this idea of the scientific method, but the applications and the nuance, the complexities when you get into the weeds is, I get excited about it. I don't know if you could pick up on it, but my brain starts firing. I'm like, well, let's do all these things and make stuff happen. So yeah, it can be a lot of fun, but I think if you bear that fundamental idea of experimenting, of putting things out and incorporating that learning into the next iteration, then you're gonna be in a better place than, frankly, a bunch of companies I've worked at in the past who don't have that loop well oiled and running well.
I think that makes a lot of sense. Last topic I wanted to touch on.
Yeah.
The world has gone through a crazy period over the last couple of years with things like COVID.
When is it not? It's always been crazy. It's always been crazy.
Very true indeed. I think in this particular time period, it's allowed people to question sort of the society around them and the structures of society and what happiness means and what success is and whether those things are different. Do you think it's important to differentiate between a work life and a separate life, whatever that is, that isn't work, and whether the happiness experienced in those things is different, whether success is different within those things, or whether that's now all wrapped up into one and people are still trying to figure out whether they can incorporate one into the other?
Absolutely. I think was it Michel de Montaigne who said that we have to have a sort of separate public and private sphere. There's this idea of I think it's in psychology around, human beings wear masks. We have personas that we put on with different groups of people based on our level of comfort and the way we want to relate to them. In our public and our private lives, we are different. I will happily get out of bed in the morning naked and walk into the ensuite. I'm not going to do that in the office with my colleagues, right? So it's just, yeah. Maybe if I get to know them really well, I don't know if that's the company culture, I could work up to it. But clearly, there is a separation. Human beings need different levels of sort of, I suppose, expression. They have these different personas that they need to put on, and respecting that's important. If I'm having a conversation with somebody at work, I won't press them on what they've been up to. And then sometimes that's taken the wrong way. I've had the feedback from people in the past that they think I'm not interested in their personal life, and I have to explain to them I am, but I just want to respect your boundaries. I don't want to say to you, what did you get up to on the weekend? I'll ask you, did you have a good weekend? Did you have a good weekend? Was it? But I won't say, what did you do on the weekend? Because I don't know that you want to tell me. Maybe you're, I don't know. I'm not going to, well, we can imagine all sorts of scenarios where somebody maybe would want to keep that kind of stuff to themselves. Yeah. So I think that respecting people's boundaries is important, and there is a separation between personal and private. And I think it was Michel de Montaigne, I think, who said this idea. He was talking about happiness and saying that for people to be happy, they need to have that separation. We need to be able to engage in certain pursuits that maybe wouldn't be acceptable at work. I don't know, maybe I'm going to a lecture by someone who's, a staunch communist or something, right? And they're talking about capitalism's bad. And I work for a venture capital firm, and I don't really want them to know that I've been going and talking about communism all weekend, right? You can see how there may be a separation that's required. So yeah, no, I absolutely think that we need to respect those boundaries and have those sort of separate spheres. I don't know that we could ever have a different a different system because of the way human beings work, right? We're fearful and shameful, and we need a certain amount of control over our environment and autonomy. And I think if you didn't have those spheres of separation, you would lose some of that autonomy and some of that separation. So I would imagine it would have quite a negative impact on people if they were expected to, be entirely, completely open with every single person they ever met.
Do you think some of those lines have started to blur because of things like COVID and because of remote working and people just trying to get their heads around it? The ability to separate a work life to your private life has become increasingly difficult.
I don't know that I think it's become more difficult to keep them separate, but I think there's maybe an expectation or a level of comfort. For example, when we're having this call now and my dogs are walking around in the background, people are quite accustomed to that now. It's not seen as odd. If you were in an office 10 years ago with a strict no remote working policy and you brought your dog into work with you, that would be strange.
Yeah. It
would be inappropriate, and you'd probably be told to take your dog home. But you don't think twice about people's dogs running around and playing and things now. So I think we have changed our expectations somewhat. I think we are more connected. You get to see the inside of people's houses now. You get to see kind of their bedrooms. I remember having calls with people where they'd be sat on their bed, and I didn't really think. I mean, I'm maybe a bit unusual. I don't really care about stuff like that. Like, I know we've all probably got a bedroom. If you live in a house, you've got a bedroom, and you probably sleep in a bed. Maybe you don't. I don't really. I'm not the sort of person who really cares. I like to be quite sort of liberal and non-judgmental with that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But no, I think you're right. There has been a shift because we now have cameras into our own sort of personal spaces, and we are expected to sort of allow people to see that kind of stuff. And the way I'm really seeing that manifest is it feels like there's an expectation for everybody now to be a content creator and an influencer and to have an audience and to be building a sort of following. I keep hearing this advice from everyone. I'm working on it myself. Everybody, it feels like you need to kind of be working on your socials and everything else and getting into sort of marketing strategy. Fortunately, early in my career, we did a lot of this kind of work at startups, so I have a bit of a head start. But no, I think you're right that the world has definitely changed as a result of everybody working, or at least a lot of very fortunate white collar workers working remotely. And we're seeing that, I think, combined with some of the influencer content creation type environment manifest as us doing this, right? Us doing a video call where we're both in our own homes.
Absolutely. And I feel like even though we've been talking for about 45 minutes, that we've only scratched the surface of a load of these topics. I think we probably need to do another episode at some point. I've got one last question if you've got the time.
Yeah, that's cool.
And I think you've kind of answered a lot of it indirectly. What is your definition?
Waffling, honestly, yeah.
Don't say your catchphrase. What is your definition of your happiness?
Hard to summarize in just a single concise sentence. I think it does come down to that idea of purpose and love. I care about the effect I have on other people, and knowing that I've improved things for other people is very rewarding for me. And I have a very strong desire to improve things, to have a positive impact on the world around me, to build the future. So if I'm doing those things, then I'm pretty good. I quite like to think I'm a virtuous person, sort of Aristotle and his virtues. Some of these ideas speak to me. I want to be a good person. I want to be proud of myself and to feel like I'm ethical and moral and knowledgeable and improving myself. Those things sort of matter to me. I mean, frankly, I've had issues with depression all my life. So I'm not do as I say and not as I do, I suppose. So yeah, those things make me feel happy. Those things definitely help. I think it was Schopenhauer who had something to say about the things that we tend to notice are the negative things. If you're sat warm and comfortable in your house, time just passes by and it's of no significance. When you stub your toe on the table as you get up, suddenly you begin living again. Life starts when you suffer. So he talks about sort of what we would traditionally call sort of positive actually being negative, because it doesn't really have any significance, and the negative actually being the positive. There's something in there, right? I think if you can experience stubbing your toe and appreciate the fact that you're living and sensing and part of the present and part of the moment, then you're probably going to be on like the level above where I am, where you could probably start a podcast and talk about mindfulness and be a bit of a yogi.
I think there's a huge thing to be said for consciously practicing happiness, and I think that's the bit is alluding to what you're describing there. We very rarely track happy moments. It's only in reflection and in hindsight usually that we go, oh, that was a good time, rather than realizing in the moments. I think happiness is a conscious effort and not just something that just happens randomly. But it's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you, James. I think we're going to need another 10 episodes probably to dive further into some of the things that we went into, especially your catchphrase. But if people are interested in reaching out to you, you've got your company name up there, Invetica. We'll have all of your
down here.
Yeah, down there. We'll have your LinkedIn and up on everything. So if people want to click onto the YouTube or onto the podcast, we'll be direct linking to yourself or to me. Thank you so much, James. It's been a pleasure having you on, and I'll let you get on with the day.
Thanks, Aaron. It's always a pleasure. Happy to come back and chat some more.
Absolutely. Cheers, James. Bye for now.